Hi.
Okay, so you can raise your right hand, my clerk will swear you.
Okay.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Thank you, Your Honor. Sir, could you state your name and spell it for the record, please?
Yes, Stephen with a PH, Cohle, C-O-H-L-E.
Could you tell the jury what you do for a living?
Yes, I'm a forensic pathologist.
And what is a forensic pathologist?
Well, a forensic pathologist is a physician who specializes in the investigation of sudden and unexpected deaths and violent deaths. Those are the main categories. And we do so by obtaining information, if it's available, about how the death occurred and where and so on, circumstances of death. The second thing is we examine the individual externally and look for a number of things, including injury, height, weight, and various physical features. The next thing we do is we do laboratory testing, which can include x-rays if needed. And finally, when we have all of the information back and we have completed our report, we certify the death as to the cause and manner of death. And sometimes there are other questions that may come up that we also try to make observations about that may be relevant to the death.
Could you give the jury a little bit of your educational background? How do you become a forensic pathologist?
Well, first you have to go to medical school. So I attended medical school at the University of Missouri at Columbia and graduated there. I then trained for 4 years in pathology at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas. For the year after that, I trained in forensic pathology at the Institute of Forensic Sciences in Dallas. And following that training, I was hired to come work here in Grand Rapids, and I've been here ever since.
And ever since, how long have you been here?
Since 1982.
So since 1982, I mean, once you graduated school and got your forensic pathology, things have changed, I would imagine, in the field. Do you do anything to stay up to date, to stay current on developments in the field of forensic pathology?
Well, yes. I attend usually 2 to 3, mostly 3 meetings a year that are involved in pathology, or that the meetings are about pathology. Usually a couple of national meetings, occasionally an international meeting, and we also have a state meeting, State Medical Examiner Association meeting here in Michigan.
In addition to that, do you take part in educating other pathologists or helping out those who are maybe looking to get in the field?
Well, yes. We, at our morgue here in Grand Rapids, I work out of Blodgett. We accept medical students. In fact, we have 2 currently that are allowed to come into our office and observe. If it weren't crowded today, I would have brought them to court, because that's part of the deal, is showing them how the system works and how our autopsies fit into the prosecution of cases and so on. I've also lectured from time to time at state and national and occasionally international meetings.
Now, in terms of being here since 1982, can you give the jury an idea of how many cases have you handled? I mean, I guess per year, give us a ballpark idea.
Well, I'd say probably total about 10,000. It's usually been about 200 to 250 cases a year, sometimes a few more.
Then when you say cases a year, those are 250 autopsies you were performing on a body.
Yes, autopsies.
Now, are you only for Kent County?
Well, I'm the chief medical examiner for Kent County, and in that regard, we do all of the autopsies, the forensic autopsies that occur in Kent County. We do them at Blodgett. There are 2 of us. I have a deputy chief medical examiner. We also do autopsies for other counties if they choose to use our services. That can include Ottawa. I think we have probably 9 or 10 other counties up to the UP. We do Sault Ste. Marie, Mackinac County, Emmett County, and a bunch of other smaller counties in northern Michigan, and we do Branch County in southern Michigan.
So in terms of doing all these autopsies, I'm assuming you've been qualified and expert in the field of forensic pathology before?
Yes.
Can you give the jury an idea how many times you've been qualified as an expert?
I would say probably 600 times.
And is that just in Kent County, or is that in other places as well?
Well, other places as well, mostly in Michigan, but a few other states.
Okay, so you've actually gone out of state and testified for
Yes.
cases. At this point in time, I'd like to enter his testimony as an expert in the field of forensic pathology.
No objection.
All right, and Dr. Cohle shall be considered an expert in that field.
Doctor, you had the opportunity to perform an autopsy on Patrick Lyoya.
Yes.
Could you tell the jury when this took place and where it took place?
Yes, the autopsy took place on April 4th of 2022, and it occurred at the morgue at Blodgett.
Could you give them a little bit of an idea of, in this case, what do you do when you start an autopsy? What
Well,
process?
what we do, the first thing, as I mentioned a little earlier, is try to get information as to how the death occurred. Now, in Kent County, one of our sources of information, probably the primary one, is we have 8 investigators who work for our office, and when there is a death that's reportable to the medical examiner, again, usually violent deaths, sudden unexpected deaths, apparent drug overdoses, babies with unsafe sleeping, and so on. Whoever's in charge of the deceased person when they're pronounced dead has the obligation to call our office. Usually this is, if they're dead out in the field, it may be paramedics, it may be police. If they make it to the hospital, it's usually going to be an ER doctor or nurse. And so they will call our office. One of our investigators will respond, and depending on the situation, if there is a scene, as in this case there was, Mr. Lyoya was still at the scene. So they will usually respond to the scene, talk to the police, make their own observations, take photographs, and will produce a report that I use, at least mostly I use. I may have other sources as well. The police who are doing the investigation sometimes come in to observe the autopsy, and but mainly it's through our investigator. I'll get information as to how the death occurred, what are the circumstances, so it'll give me an idea of what to consider when I'm doing the autopsy.
Now, you had this report. I'm assuming at some point in time the body actually delivered to you. What steps do you take when you actually have the body to start performing the autopsy?
Well, when the body arrives, the body is almost always bagged, put in a body bag, in other words, prior to transport. The body is put on an autopsy table. It's photographed as it is in the condition in which we received it. We then inventory clothing and jewelry. We then remove that and clean the body up if there is blood or vomit or other material on the body. We'll clean the body up and rephotograph it. And then in that second phase, if there are injuries that are, or other markings, but oftentimes it's injuries, that are relevant, we will make sure we get a good photograph of those injuries. If someone, for example, is shot in the head, we'll shave around the injury so we can get a good photograph, so that not only I, for future reference, but anybody else reviewing the autopsy can have material to review and give an opinion.
So in terms of that, when you did specifically with Patrick, this autopsy, did you notice any injuries or something? Did anything jump out at you when you performed your initial overview of the body?
Well, the main finding was that he had a gunshot wound in the back of the head.
So did you shave it as you shave his head to get a better look?
Yes, around the wound, usually for a diameter of several inches.
Why is it? Why do you have to shave? Why do you have to
Well,
shave it? What's the purpose of that?
if a person is shot in a hair-bearing area, then the hair can obscure the characteristics of the wound. And for example, when a gun is fired, besides the bullet coming out the muzzle, there will be soot and partly burned and unburned grains of gunpowder that are blown out of the weapon, of the muzzle. So we want to see if this gunshot residue is present, because it can give us some assistance as to the range of fire. So we want to shave all the hair from around the wound so we can identify such gunshot residue if present.
Now, when you're doing your autopsy, you at this point in time have no access to any videos, anything of the incident. You just had the report. They don't give you a video of what occurred. You're just basing it on your report and what you find on the body.
Yes, at the time of the autopsy, there may be reasons later on to review relevant videos, but on the day of the autopsy, we concern ourselves with what we see on the body.
Okay. The record showing opposing counsel exhibit 35, and they would provide a copy. Doctor, kind of doing this newfangled way instead of printing it out. We're going to show you what has been marked as exhibit for People's 35. Do you recognize that?
I do.
What do you recognize that as?
Well, that is the back of Mr. Lyoya's head, and it shows a gunshot wound entering pretty much in the midline of the back of the head, and then we have shaved the hair around it in order to elucidate the features of the wound.
So this would be an accurate picture of the wound as you saw it the day you performed the autopsy?
Yes.
I move the admission of exhibit 35, Your Honor.
Objection. 35 is not admitted.
Turn off the lights now, you're publishing. I think there is a laser pointer. Found it? Could you tell the jury what we're looking at here for the record?
Well, this is exhibit, I believe you said 35. This is the back of Mr. Lyoya's head. Of course, here in the middle of the shaved area of the scalp is the gunshot wound. And then we have, again, shaved the hair from around the wound.
Now, in terms of when you look in the wound, you talk about looking for gunpowder. Did you find any gunpowder? What were the results when you start looking?
Well, usually what would happen if there's gunpowder, the weapon is not going to be in tight contact with the skin or the body. It's got to be at least a fraction of an inch, often 1 or several inches away, usually, depending on the weapon, up to 3 or 4 feet. So we're looking really, what's most important is we identify the wound, and then we're looking at the skin around the wound. In this case, I did not see any gunpowder surrounding this wound.
Now, do you do a microscope when you say when you look at the skin around it, you're talking about the shaved area, if you will?
Yes.
Okay, so you never saw any gunpowder there.
Correct.
What does that indicate to you?
Well, it indicates generally one of two things, it can get a bit complicated. It indicates either the wound is a distant wound, which would be greater than, say, 3 or 4 feet. That is, the muzzle to the person is greater than 3 or 4 feet. It can also mean it's a contact wound in which the muzzle is up against the head such that the gunshot residue is blown into the wound rather than being deposited around the wound.
So based on in your opinion, when you have the wound like this and no gunshot residue, what do you surmise from that?
Well, again, it could be, and I think it probably is a contact wound. Often when a firearm is tied up against the body when it's fired, besides the bullet and the powder and the soot, which is blown out the muzzle, there's also going to be gas from the burned gunpowder. And that may split and tear the skin around the entry wound. That did not happen in this case, just doesn't always happen. But so again, if I were, another thing I wanted to add, when you're talking about range of fire and looking for the gunshot residue, if an item, piece of clothing, can be a lot of things, but if something is interposed between the weapon and the person's body, even if the weapon is almost touching the body, that intermediary object can filter out gunshot residue. So that's just another consideration. We try not to be absolute in forensic pathology because there can be exceptions to the general rule.
So you didn't see any clothing or anything else in the wound here?
I did not. He was wearing kind of a loosely knit, I think it was a green sweater that did have a collared area on it. I don't want to get too much into the weeds here unless you or the defense has questions, but he was wearing that bit of clothing, and hypothetically, that may have, if interposed between the weapon and his head, could have filtered out some of this residue. I did not identify a hole, although it was loosely woven, but at the time of the autopsy, I didn't identify a hole. When I reviewed scene photographs, there was a possible defect in the back collar area, but I can't say for sure if that was, if that was made by the bullet or was already there.
All right, thank you. You can turn that off now. So in terms of, you see that, do you do anything else? I mean, you see, okay, there's a gunshot wound in the back of the head. Are you done then?
Well, we continue with the autopsy. The question is several. One of the issues that we have to do is recover the bullet if it's still in them. Now, we take an X-ray, and that's and we examine the body. So between those two, we can usually figure out if there's a bullet still in the person. In this case, there was no exit wound, and an X-ray did indeed show a bullet that had exited from the skull but lodged beneath the scalp on the right, approximately where I'm pointing to myself.
And you retrieved that bullet?
Yes.
Now, even though you got this gunshot wound in the head, do you still look at the rest of the body?
Yes, we always do a complete autopsy, just to see if there's anything else that could have contributed to the death, or even sometimes there are fringe benefits to the family if we find a disease of the type that can be inherited, such as coronary artery atherosclerosis. Especially in a young man like this, if he had significant coronary atherosclerosis, that would be of immense importance to the family because they may be at risk for developing that and having a heart attack at an early age. So that's just one example, but we just look for anything else that may be of relevance to the family or anything else that may have contributed to the death. Or in our toxicology screening, sometimes anything that might have altered the behavior of the person to make them behave in a certain way.
Now, going to that, I guess the first thing was there any other injuries? I guess anything pertinent, any injuries that you would have thought may have been important or caused during this incident?
No, there were no, there was evidence of remote injury, but there was no, and that didn't contribute to the death, and there was no other recent injury that would have occurred around the time of the death.
And I guess that's why remote means
in the
distance.
past, healed.
Okay.
Yeah, over with.
That's why I make sure remote to me can also mean from far away.
Oh, right. No, well, I'm thinking in the medical sense, gotcha. We would say.
So there's some old injuries, but nothing that was recent.
Correct.
Nothing of substance.
Right.
In terms of you talking about toxicology, what did you find anything in the toxicology?
Yes. The main finding was that he had a very high blood alcohol. To put it in whole numbers, it's 290. That into context, 80 or higher is driving while intoxicated in Michigan, and he was 290. Another fluid that we test that can act on a check of the accuracy of the blood for alcohol is we take the eye fluid and analyze that, and that had a level of 330. So indeed, we can confirm that he had a high level of alcohol, or particularly ethanol, at the time he died.
Now, when you complete all this, you get the toxicology results, do you come up with a conclusion in terms of the manner of death?
Yes.
What was the manner of death?
The manner of death in this case was homicide.
And what was the cause of death?
Cause of death was the gunshot wound of the head.
When you say the manner of death being homicide, can you tell the jury what you mean by that?
We have 5 choices for manner of death, and the medical examiner, it's part of our job as medical examiners to make the determination. It's not a legal determination. In other words, just because I call a death a homicide doesn't mean somebody's going to be prosecuted. That's up to the prosecutor. But we have 5 choices, which is homicide, accident, suicide, natural, indeterminate. And so we have to pick from one of those 5 for the manner. Those are mainly it's more of a public health issue for us as medical examiners. In other words, public health agencies such as the state or the Centers for Disease Control can take our data and use it to determine like how many deaths are accidental in the country or any population that they're studying.
Okay. Any other questions, Your Honor? Dr. Cohle,
Good afternoon.
good to see you again.
Okay. I want to talk about some of your testimony. First, you indicated that the shot that killed Mr. Lyoya was in the back of the head, pretty much in the center,
Yes.
lower, and it traveled in a straight line to the.
I think it did. There was no evidence of ricochet.
Because sometimes a bullet can move around inside a body cavity, right? If
It
it's a
can, or if
bone.
it hits a bone or something, it may deflect. There was no evidence of that in this case.
So the bullet went from the back of the head to the front,
Yes,
and then it went from basically the center, and it moved to the right.
yes,
And it went from a lower part of the head to a higher part of the head.
that's right.
And I believe before you pointed to the upper right part of your head as where the bullet didn't pierce the skin and leave, but that's where the exit wound would have been had it traveled just a little bit further.
Well, yes, it was found beneath the scalp, in other words, on the right side of the head.
So that if you drew a straight line, could you just tell the jury where the straight line would be from the entry wound to the almost exit wound?
I'm not very flexible, but the entry wound was in the back of the head in the midline where I'm indicating on myself, and I recovered the bullet, again, on the right side of the head beneath the scalp.
Okay. And so that would be consistent with the gun that had an angle, and I'll represent that Mr. Schurr is right-handed, and the gun was in his right hand.
Okay?
He would have to have it at an angle.
Well, either the
Or-
gun's at an angle or Mr. Lyoya's head may have been turning as he was
That
shot.
was my next question. If his head was turning, that would be consistent with someone turning to the left.
Yes.
Okay. All right, now I want to talk about this contact wound issue, because you're suggesting that the gun, you believe, probably was right against the head,
Probably.
but it's possible that it was not right against the head, correct?
Right. Here's what I would say, assuming that there's nothing in between the muzzle of the weapon, and that's an assumption. But if there's nothing between the muzzle of the weapon and the skin where the bullet entered, then in this case, I think it's most fair to say the options are, one, it is a contact wound such that all the gunshot residue was blown into the wound and not deposited on the skin because it's a contact. If it's not a contact, let's say the range of fire, and I don't know if you want to give hypotheticals or not, but I'll start with one. If the range of fire is several inches, I'm indicating muzzle and head here, there's going to be deposition of gunshot gunshot residue, including soot and gunpowder. There wasn't any, as we could see in the photograph. So another option is that something was interposed between the muzzle of the weapon and the scalp. He did have long dreadlocks. I think I estimated they measured up to 10 inches. So I think it's possible that a dreadlock or two might have gotten caught between the muzzle of the weapon and the head.
It's also possible the weapon was further enough away that you wouldn't find gunshot
Well,
residue.
if it were, and again, I wasn't there, I have information that I was given, but let's just assume I don't have any information. Sure, if it's beyond the range of deposition of gunpowder, which is, again, usually 3 to 4 feet with a weapon like this, a 9mm pistol, then I would say, yeah, it could be. It's consistent with that.
Okay. And you didn't find any gunshot residue on his scalp, correct?
Right, correct.
And you found none on the clothing?
I didn't see any. I did submit it to the laboratory.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that you looked at some of the crime scene photos.
Yes.
All right, I'm going to show you what's been marked as identification as L23. I'm going to represent to you, that's one of the
Oh,
photos.
oh, yeah, yes, yes, yes.
Do you
yes.
recall the green sweater that Mr. Lyoya
Yes,
was
yeah,
wearing?
I'm oriented now, and yes, the sweater and the collar, which could have been interposed, are shown here.
And yeah, because you mentioned in your testimony that there might have been some damage to a piece of fabric that could have maybe been in front of the bullet.
It could have been interposed between the bullet and the scalp.
And is this what you're talking about in L-23?
Although we can't, the jury isn't seeing it, yes, I'm pointing out to you that there's what could be a defect, I just can't tell, which is why I submitted the clothing to the lab.
Okay. Do you recall if you saw any powder on the sweater?
I did not see any. I would have looked, but because of the weave of the sweater, it might have been hard to
Did you see any
detect.
burning or melting on the fabric?
No,
But you did request and watch the video?
yes.
Now, you indicated that, on your direct testimony, that Mr. Lyoya had a blood alcohol level of 290
Yes,
and a vitreous ethanol level, I think you said the eye level.
well, vitreous is eye fluid, so it was 330, yeah.
Is one more accurate than the other?
Well, blood is a little more accurate because that tells you exactly the level of alcohol in the body at the time the person died. Basically, a given level of alcohol in the blood will equilibrate. In other words, eventually it'll be the same level in the eye fluid. However, because of the time passage that it takes for that equilibration to take place, if someone drank, say, 2 hours ago and got a level of 100, it might take 2 hours for that level of alcohol of 100 to get into the eye fluid. By that time, the blood level's going down because the body's metabolizing the alcohol. So the point of all that is it's kind of useful as a check. They should be more or less in the same ballpark, the blood level and the vitreous. If there's a wide disparity, there may be an error, a lab error in the analysis.
Either way, Mr. Lyoya was well beyond the legal limit.
Yes,
Okay. Now, you also said you checked for types of diseases. You found evidence of a fatty liver disease,
yes,
and that would be consistent with someone possibly that drinks alcohol very, very often.
it would be indeed.
Did you find any taser wires when you did the examination?
Well, they were on him. And again, I saw these, I think they came in with the body, actually. I saw in the scene photographs, there were these, like, cartridges, 2 of them, and a lot of tangled up wire. I didn't see any taser dart holes in Mr.
That was my
Lyoya.
next question, is whether or not you saw that, whether or not Mr. Lyoya had been hit with any taser darts.
No, I'd say no, because I looked.
And the taser wires, they had blood on them?
Yes,
And did you send those to Michigan State Police?
yes,
Okay, and for further testing?
yes, if needed, yes.
Nothing further taken.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Hands raised on the jury. Oh, there's one hand. My clerk will come and grab that question from you. So this isn't really a question for the witness, so I'm not gonna have you approach. But I am going to ask if this witness may be excused.
You may, Your Honor.